At the time of this recording, Top Gun holds the top spot in the box office. Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill is the number one song in America, and the US and Russia are locked in a tense stare down that might wind up leading to war. All of this makes me ask, did we just time travel? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. There's a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a sense of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is all about, but in short, we're going to take a look at a particular subgenre of horror and then examine 3 movies from that subgenre. Today, what we're talking about is time travel horror movies. And this is a subgenre that I love because I love me some stories about time travel. Now, time travel is obviously a little bit more of a science fiction concept than a horror concept, but just like any other genre, they tend to bleed into each other sometimes. And this is one where the sci-fi and horror really overlap because pretty much everything, almost everything that we're going to talk about today has a heavy sci-fi element to it. Now, like I said, I love me some time travel. I love stories that kind of twist and intertwine and kind of turn in on themselves. I love things like time loops and paradoxes and things like that, where the narrative is disjointed intentionally to reveal something later, payoffs later on. And these are movies that are really good examples of that. The issue with time travel for a lot of people, and admittedly sometimes for me, is that it can be a little bit confusing. A lot of the times the logic is not sound because, let's be honest, when it comes to time travel, the concept of it really is shaky. There's a couple of different ideas or theories about time travel. If you saw, for example, Avengers Endgame, you kind of heard them talk about this a little bit. You know, the idea of does reality fragment, and when you go back in time, does it start a whole new reality, a different offshoot of that, or can you go back in time and change the timeline? Or when you go back in time, are you able to even affect things, or does it wind up staying relatively the same no matter what you do? All of those existential questions are fascinating to me, and I love when movies explore them. But sometimes movies don't really explore them so much as they just kind of break the rules, don't really adhere to their own rules. And so that's always an issue with horror movies as well, is sometimes these movies, if you pick at them a little too much, they don't hold up to scrutiny. But I don't care. I don't care because I love these kinds of movies. I love time travel movies. I love horror movies. So when they come together, it's like chocolate and peanut butter, man. It's really delicious. And so I don't really care to nitpick it as much as I might some other movies where I'll kind of poo poo a little bit about how the narrative isn't super tight. In these ones, a lot of the time the narrative is not super tight. The movie, upon close examination, probably doesn't make that much sense. But as long as you're enjoying the ride, it doesn't matter. And I am enjoying the ride. Today's movies, we're going to talk about them in order, undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level, like we do. And in this case, we're going to talk about increasing level of confusion. Like I said, these movies aren't always the tightest of narrative, the tightest of logic. And as we go on, these movies are going to get harder and harder to justify their logic, or harder and harder to explain or understand. So with that, why don't we go forward in time and jump into these movies? The first time travel horror movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Happy Death Day. Happy Death Day came out in 2017 and was a surprise big hit. It is answering the question of what happens when you marry a slasher film to the Bill Murray classic comedy Groundhog's Day, a question that nobody ever asked, frankly, but we all actually needed answered because this movie wound up being hilariously fun, an enjoyable romp of a good time, and a surprisingly fresh take on the slasher subgenre that I thoroughly enjoyed. If you haven't seen it before, the movie follows a co-ed named Tree, who winds up getting murdered on her birthday, only to wake up and start the day all over again and get killed again and start the day over again, over and over again, until she can figure out why she was being murdered and prevent it from happening. And the stakes escalate as her body keeps taking more and more abuse from getting killed over and over again, and she starts running out of time to solve the mystery. I'll leave it there so as not to spoil it for you in case you haven't seen it before. But if you haven't seen it before, highly recommend you check this one out. This is the kind of horror film that I think is very accessible to people, even people who don't like horror. Even my wife watched this one, for example. This is a movie that is pretty light, pretty breezy, pretty fun. It's got a little bit of scariness to it. It's got a little bit of gore to it, but not so much so that the average newbie can't handle it. This is a fun movie, and it's focused on the fun. It's borderline horror comedy, although the humor is not so much so that it really feels like it's trying to be more funny than scary. And it's got a bit of the, like I said before, the sci-fi aspect tied into it, but it really is at its heart a slasher film. It's a slasher film with a novel or unique take or unique angle on this, as opposed to the standard stalk and slash, mindless killer kind of thing. And that felt very refreshing to me. It felt like a breath of fresh air because, I love me some slasher movies, and this one was one that I frankly hadn't seen before, and that really was a pleasant surprise. The movie's written by Scott Lobdell, and comic book fans may recognize that name. He was a big writer for mostly for Marvel Comics, did the X-Men for a while. He's done some great comics, and the script is fun. Like I said, don't pick at it too much because it might not be the tightest of logic, but it's fun, and it's focused on that fun and having a good time with creative kills of the same person over and over again. That person, played by Jessica Roth, is fantastic. The character of Tree, which is short for Teresa, I didn't know that, but there you go. Learn something new every day. She plays it wonderfully. She is a tremendous amount of fun. She kind of goes through a character arc of maturing and becoming a lot better person through this experience, and it works out really well with Jessica Roth because she plays both the kind of shallow, self-interested person and the more enlightened person with the heroine, the Ripley-esque heroine tied into it. Well, all really well. She kind of goes amongst all of that really, really well. She's very likable, very pretty, very talented actress, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of her because I really, really enjoyed her in this movie. Like I said, this movie was very popular when it came out, which is kind of a nice, refreshing thing for a property that's unique and not based on some other property, comic or TV show or whatever. And I remember Universal pushing this movie pretty heavily when I went to Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios. They had a whole maze that was geared towards this movie before it even come out. And I talked about this a little bit when I was talking to Noah on Hamburgers and Horror about underrated and overrated masks, because I brought up this mask, the baby face mask, the mascot of their school, the college that all the killings are happening at. It's a terrible mask. And I remember thinking that when I was in the horror maze, Halloween Horror Nights, that you had all these baby face killers in the maze, and I was like, this is kind of a goofy mask. I don't know if it really is that effective. And when I saw the movie, it's not. It's not very effective, and that's the only misstep of the movie for me. Everything else works really well. The mask is subpar, but the rest of the movie super fun. Great performances, really enjoyable, good kills, a pretty fun mystery that is not super complex, but it kept me confused long enough to enjoy the ride. So I definitely like this movie a lot. And like I said, it was a big hit. I'm not the only one who did. It was enough of a hit to have a sequel. The sequel is more sci-fi and less slasher film. It really kind of focuses more on explaining a little bit more about the reasoning for the Groundhog's Day time loop aspect of the movie, which maybe I didn't need, but the sequel was okay. It was enjoyable. I didn't like it nearly as much as I liked the first one because again, the first one was a slasher movie, and the second one is a little bit more sci-fi. And while it went to pains to explain the situation, I don't know that that explanation was A, necessary, and B, fully tight. I haven't really stopped to think about it enough to think, does that actually make sense? Because I know it probably doesn't. And like I said, why pick at something if you're enjoying it? I enjoyed the second one just fine. I'd maybe be up for a third one. I don't know if there was enough interest in the second movie, which didn't do as well, to warrant a third movie, but I'd be up for it if they did it. But I definitely am down with the first movie. So if you haven't seen it, check it out and let me know what you think. But if you've seen it, let me know if I'm being too effusive for this, as I tend to be sometimes when I really like a movie. Give me your more grounded response to Happy Death Day if you have differing opinions on this. I like it. I think the lead actress is great. I think it's a well-written movie. I think it's a tremendous amount of fun, and it's a great ride for horror fans and non-horror fans alike. So if this sounds like something that's interesting to you, check it out. The second time travel movie that we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Triangle. Triangle came out in 2009 and is a cult hit movie that has really exponentially grown in popularity since it came out. And lately, I feel like I've been hearing about it a lot. It seems like it's gotten a resurgence in popularity, and for good reason, because Triangle is an absolutely fantastic movie from start to finish in pretty much every possible way. If you haven't seen it before, the movie stars Melissa George as a single mother who gets an opportunity to go sailing with some people, some friends, and while they're out sailing, a storm wrecks their boat and they get stranded out in the ocean. But an ocean liner comes by and they were able to get on the ocean liner for rescue. Only the ocean liner seems to be deserted, but there also may be a killer on board as strange things start happening, and it's a little hard to explain further than that without spoiling the movie. And God help me, I don't want to spoil this movie for you because it's so good. Triangle is a blast, and I have yet to meet somebody who didn't at least like it, if not flat out love it. And I think a large part of that is because of the subject matter that it tackles and how it does so. Like I said, it's hard to talk about this movie without spoiling it. In fact, just putting it into this subgenre spoils it a little bit because now you're looking for some sort of time travel aspect to the movie. But I'm still going to try to dance around it as much as I possibly can because the less you know about this movie, the better. And I think that's part of why it wasn't a huge hit when it came out, is because they didn't want to spoil it for people. So they didn't give away too many details about the story of the movie. And as a result, the general premise of the movie isn't super interesting, and it's a movie we've seen before. So I have a feeling that that might have been part of why the movie wasn't super huge. In fact, I think it wasn't even released theatrically in the US. I think it was released in the UK. It was like a UK Australian co-production, and so it got released there theatrically, but it didn't get a theatrical release in the US, I believe. And it seems like nobody really had any confidence in it, and it's a shame because the movie is absolutely fantastic. Now, the director of the movie is Christopher Smith, and we've talked about movies of his before. We talked about Severance, and there's another movie he did called Creep, which we haven't talked about yet, but we may wind up talking about that in the future. And he's an excellent director. Severance, if you recall from our earlier video, fantastic movie, really nailing that horror comedy balance. But this movie is not a comedy at all. This movie is straight up serious horror slash sci-fi and mystery, and it really is hitting all those notes really, really well. Just great sense of atmosphere, of mood, and getting great performances out of the actors, especially Melissa George, the lead. We've talked about Melissa George quite a bit. She's in the Amityville Horror remake. She's in Turistas, 30 Days of Night. Every time I see Melissa George, I think she's fabulous. This is probably the best movie that I've seen her in. Her best performance. She's wonderful in this movie. She holds it down really, really well. You're with her on this. You're her. She's your point of view character, and you like her, and you're with her on that. Even as the movie starts to spin out into really bizarre territory. And again, I'm starting to dance around it, but the movie starts to get weird and starts to spin out into some strange stuff, and Melissa George keeps you with it, and I think that's great. The one thing I'll say about the movie in terms of trying to explain it without giving it away is that the filmmakers set out to make a movie that explored the idea of deja vu. And I don't think it's too much to reveal that. I think that knowing that makes for a still enjoyable mystery to unravel. And I like that idea of kind of figuring out what exactly deja vu is. And if you've ever experienced deja vu, this movie will sit with you in an interesting way, I feel. I think that that is a good way to kind of dive into this and kind of tease that movie out, what it is. But what it really winds up being is just a well-paced horror mystery. And I could have put this in the horror mystery subgenre, but I put it here, even at the risk of spoiling it, because it really is what makes this movie stand out. It's why so many people seem to love this movie, why it keeps growing in popularity. I know several of you have seen this movie and like it a lot. I've talked to some of you about it. I know Sarah Hawkinson from Possessed by Horror. This is like one of her favorite movies. I see on Twitter a lot of time people tweeting about it because she turned them onto it. So maybe it's just word of mouth that's really spreading this thing around. Like people are enthused about it and go and talk about it, and it winds up being something that other people get interested in, and it kind of just grows and grows and grows by word of mouth, which is great because this movie deserves to be seen. It's just a wonderful movie. It's like I said, I really have no faults to pick with this. I know that if I really examine it, like I said earlier, if I really examine the logic of it, the internal logic of it, it might not hold up to scrutiny, but it might. But I don't even want to do it. I don't even want to try to pick at it because I don't want to lessen my enjoyment of it. This is a movie that I hold in very high regard and very high esteem. It's a revered movie. I love it. and I'm not alone on that. So if you have not checked this movie out yet, get on board, man. Climb on the ocean liner and find out what's going on with Triangle, because this is a ride that you will not soon forget. And I almost guarantee that you're going to enjoy it because, like I said, I have yet to meet somebody who out and out disliked this movie. If you are somebody who's seen this movie and disliked it, please let us know in the comments what it is about this movie that falls short for you. I would like to know that, and I'll be respectful about your opinion, of course, as always, but I'd like to know what doesn't hit the mark for you, because for me, every single aspect of this movie hits the mark. The acting, the directing, the writing, the set design, the music, everything just comes together really nicely and makes for a very fun ride that, as you're unraveling the mystery and as you're making the connections, just gets more and more satisfying, and then winds up leading to a wonderful, heart-wrenching, fantastic conclusion. So obviously I'm super high on Triangle, so if you haven't seen it, it's an obvious high recommend from me. And the last time travel horror movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Donnie Darko. Donnie Darko came out in 2001 and is an absolute masterpiece of a film, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I'm, again, not in the minority, because this is another one of those movies that was not a huge hit when it came out, but has grown immensely in popularity as a cult favorite. And for good reason, once again, because this movie is an ambitious movie where a lot of things are going right, but also an incredibly convoluted movie that is going to leave a lot of people cold. That's an interesting mix, but we'll get into it. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about the titular character, Donnie Darko, a troubled teen played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who is suffering from some mental health issues. And one night he goes sleepwalking, and he has a vision of a strange, evil bunny telling him that the world's going to end. Meanwhile, his house gets hit by a jet plane engine that would have killed him had he not gone sleepwalking. And from there, a whole adventure unfolds involving all kinds of strange things, including time travel. But we don't want to get too into it because we don't want to spoil any of the movie for you, even though it might help to spoil it because it's a little bit hard to follow. But Donnie Darko is worth the effort. The movie is a, a labyrinthine mystery slash existential examination slash sci-fi adventure slash strange creepy horror movie slash Armageddon movie. Like, it's got so much going on, and yet if you can just experience the ride, you're almost bound to have a good time because it's just so well made on so many levels. The director of this movie is Richard Kelly, and this is his debut movie. And talk about, swinging for the fences and really connecting. This movie just announced his talent with just like an explosion. And unfortunately, he's never really quite matched that announcement of talent. He did Southland Tales, and people have different opinions on that. I actually like the movie, but I'm in the minority on that. But Kelly really has yet to live up to the potential that he's shown with his debut feature. This movie is just so engrossing for a number of reasons, not the least of which is an impeccable cast. Like I said, Jake Gyllenhaal is your star, but there is a bevy of other names in this movie, not the least of which is Patrick Swayze. There's Jenna Malone, who I love me some Jenna Malone. Maggie Gyllenhaal playing Jake's sister, and she is his sister. Mary McCormick, Drew Barrymore, Noah Wiley, Seth Rogen shows up in a small role. Like, there's so many recognizable names and faces in this movie, and every single one of them is doing A-level work. Everybody's bringing it. The movie is directed very well, considering how twisty and bizarre and convoluted and kind of hard to follow the story is. It doesn't feel that way in the moment. You're just kind of going along on this really, really gentle ride. It's not jarring or strange or unsettling, other than when it's trying to be unsettling is kind of a creepy movie. And I credit Richard Kelly with that. And I also credit his musical selections. This movie is very noteworthy for its soundtrack, which is absolutely fantastic set of mostly 80s music. And that works out really well because the movie's set in the late 80s and Reagan era America, which doesn't really have a lot to do with the movie, but gives it a certain feel that people of a certain age, i.e., me, can appreciate and really warm up to. The movie does so much in such a short amount of time that it's not a surprise that this movie actually had to be cut down. The theatrical version was about 30 minutes shorter, than what Richard Kelly had originally intended to do, and he took some steps to try to make things a little bit more streamlined. He added some title cards and things like that, and uh, I think that it still wound up being a really wonderful thing, the theatrical version, even though it wasn't exactly his original vision. But I say that as somebody who can really get behind these kind of twisty turvy movies. In fact, it's a fun story. I saw this movie at the same time that I saw Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive had come out. David Lynch movie, famous, Academy Award nominated movie. Love that movie, and I went to go see it in a little art house theater. And when I was watching that movie, I saw the trailer for Donnie Darko, and I had no idea what Donnie Darko was. And I was like, "Oh my god, I need to see that movie. That looks so insanely weird and awesome." And I was just in the mood for that because I was watching some David Lynch. And sure enough, Donnie Darko was playing at that same theater. So I left Mulholland Drive when it ended and went and saw Donnie Darko immediately afterwards. And then came out with my mind completely fried. Having watched Mulholland Drive and then Donnie Darko back to back, my mind was fried. We went out for pie afterwards and tried to sort all of that out. It was a futile endeavor. But I was so happy. I enjoyed that so much because you can just go along for the ride. Like a David Lynch movie, you don't need to worry about the narrative making sense. You just need to experience it. You need to feel it, and that's what I did with Donnie Darko. Now there is a director's cut of the movie that was released that is a little bit more closer to Kelly's vision, maybe, but also kind of goes to some links to try to explain it a little bit more, and I like it. I do think that it helps a lot if you really want to understand it a little bit easier. It's easier to understand. It may be at the cost of some of the flow, to be honest with you. It's like a half an hour longer, 20 minutes longer, or whatever. And so it feels longer as a result. So it may not move as well as the original theatrical version did. But I like both. I guess if I were to tell you, I'd say start with the theatrical version. And if you really get into it, check out the director's cut. I would say start that way. Or if you're afraid of not really being able to understand it and that it'll turn you off because you don't understand it, then maybe just jump straight to the director's cut. It'll spoon feed it a little bit more to you, but a little bit, you know. The fact of the matter is the movie is a little incomprehensible, and that's okay. Like I said, don't pick at the scab. Don't really try to figure it out. Don't try to hold up and see if it really works out that well. You know, it's a time travel, time loop paradox type thing. Just go with it, man. Like I said, the movie has gotten more and more popular since it was released, and frankly, kind of bombed, didn't make much of an impact. So much so that they did do a direct-to-video sequel that had nothing to do with Richard Kelly or anybody else except for DeVay Chase, who played the younger sister of Donnie Darko, and that's the name of the movie, S. Darko, for Samantha Darko. And don't bother with this. It's got nothing to do with anything. It's a total cash grab, and everybody hates it. So don't waste your time with that one. In fact, I feel like if you see that one, it'll make you dislike the original even more. So skip it. Just pretend it doesn't exist. Just focus on the original or the director's cut of the original. Either way, you're bound to have a good time because this movie is just a beautiful work of art that I absolutely love. And again, I know not everybody feels the same way about this. If you're one of them, let me know in the comments below where it falls short for you. Is it just because it's convoluted, or is there other things that not work for you? Did the cast not work for you? Did the music not work for you? Was it not directed well for you? Because all those things hit really well for me. So I appreciate the difference in opinion. Share it with us in the comments below. But if you haven't seen Donnie Darko, it's an ambitious ride. So be aware of that. Make sure that you're buckled up for something that is existential and challenging and complicated and wonderful. And if you're down for that, you're probably going to have a good time. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the time travel horror movie subgenre. But I've got a few extra credit movies for you because you know I love this subgenre. And if you do too, you should check these movies out as well. The first movie I'm going to mention is The Terminator. The Terminator came out in 1984. It's a James Cameron film starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Linda Hamilton, Michael Biehn, and is a bona fide sci-fi action horror classic. And some people might debate about putting the word horror in there, but we'll get into that in just a second. If for some reason you haven't managed to see this movie, the movie is about a time traveling cyborg from the future that comes back in time to kill the mother of the future leader of a human resistance that uprises when the machines in the world rise up against humanity and try to wipe us out from the face of the planet. But we won't go into too much more details on that because if you haven't seen that movie, you're way late. You should see that movie and check it out. The movie is, like I said, basically a bona fide classic, but not everybody would think of it as a horror movie because it's an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie. It's definitely got sci-fi action in there. It's really more of an action movie, and all of that is true. But when you boil this movie down to its essence, it's a slasher film. It's got this unstoppable hulking man, behemoth, chasing down hunting down women, all named Sarah Connor, and killing them. And it's got a final girl in Linda Hamilton. It's a slasher movie, but it's a sci-fi action slasher movie, and I absolutely love it. I saw this movie when it came out when I was a kid, and I fell in love with it. I was a kid, the '80s, and Arnold Schwarzenegger movies were all that, and I love it. And it's a shame that Arnold has gone away from playing these villainous roles like this because uh, this was fantastic. He's so brutal in it, and as you almost no doubt know, unless you've been living under a rock. This movie spawned a massive franchise, mostly with Arnold Schwarzenegger reprising his role in some form or another, but always as a good guy. The Terminator 2, or T2 as it's sometimes called, is very, very popular. Most people will say it's better than the original. That's a lie. It's a dirty lie. Because it's not as good as the original to me because it loses that horror element, frankly. And not to mention it's got Edward Furlong. But a lot of people love it because it doubles down on the action. It's got better special effects that have held up really, really well. But for me, the original is where it's at. I love the original movie. I love the creepy, unsettling, stoic performance of Arnold Schwarzenegger, one of his best roles, in my opinion. I love Michael Bihn's desperate Kyle Reese. I love Linda Hamilton's evolution into essentially Ripley from Alien. Like, it basically, just that final girl prototype, but in a fresh way because of the sci-fi and action aspects of it. The movie is just well made, and you can expect that because it's James Cameron. Even though it's early James Cameron, he's a hell of a director, and he's doing great work here. But the Terminator, you guys have probably seen it, frankly, and if you haven't seen it, again, you're late to the game. Get to it. But it's a fantastic movie. People just don't often think of it as a horror movie, but I assure you, it is. But if you disagree, let me know why you disagree. Tell me, make your case in the comments below. But if you haven't seen the Terminator, get right on it. It is one of the best sci-fi action horror movies of all time. So, by all means, if you haven't, yeah, you should have already seen it. The second extra credit movie I'm going to mention is a movie called Time Crimes. And Time Crimes came out in 2007. It's a Spanish film by director Nacho Vigalondo, and it is absolutely brilliant, but admittedly not super horror, even though it really was kind of billed that way. Kind of the opposite of the Terminator when I think about it, but we'll get into the details of that in just a minute. If you've not seen the movie, it's about a man named Hector who has a house in the countryside with his wife, and one day he comes across this woman who's been assaulted in the woods. And when he goes to help, he gets attacked by a man wearing pink bandages wrapping over his face so you can't see him. And the man tries to stab him, and he runs and tries to hide and comes across a scientist who has access to a time machine. And that's where the hijinks really start to abound in this movie. And I'm going to stop there because I don't want to spoil this movie for you, even though you might have a bit of an idea where it's going to go. Uh, the movie does wind up going in some surprising ways and winds up having what I think is a very fun, very interesting ending. As I noted, the movie is directed by Nacho Vigalondo, a Spanish director, and he's done a few things, not a whole lot of work, surprisingly. But the thing that we most recently talked about is a movie called Colossal with Anne Hathaway that I absolutely loved. But I'd seen Time Crimes first, and this movie is probably better than Colossal, which is for me saying a lot because I love Colossal. But Time Crimes is brilliant. I'm a sucker for a good time travel horror movie, and this movie is a great time travel movie. It really does have a lot of fun with that time travel aspect, even though, once again, probably not the tightest of logic when it comes to the time travel aspects, but who cares because it's a fun ride. Where it kind of suffers a little bit, and I use that word loosely, is in the horror aspect because the movie is billed as a horror movie. The cover looks like a horror movie, and there are little aspects of it, especially early on, that feel like a horror movie. But then it goes very sci-fi. It goes very sci-fi, adventure, mystery, and that's okay. That's okay. once a big piece of that mystery gets revealed, a large part of the horror comes out of the movie, but I'm not mad at it because everything else is working so well. The casting is done really, really well. Nacho Vigalondo plays a scientist, so he's kind of cast himself in that Hitchcock style, if you will. But everybody in the movie is really good, and it's directed really, really well. It's a low budget movie, and in a sense, it kind of feels low budget, but it's shot in a way that really works. It doesn't look cheap, but it doesn't look expensive, but it has a certain realism to it that suits the movie incredibly well, and I love it. I love that the way they shot this movie puts you right in there and makes you feel connected to it. For a movie that has a lot of really heavy sci-fi element to it, it feels remarkably grounded. And again, in part because of your lead actor, who is wonderful in the movie, and in part because of the way it was directed. It really feels like it puts you into the movie, and you can go along with this ride as an everyman because your lead character is an everyman, and it all comes together super nicely. Again, I'm dancing around some plot points because I don't want to spoil things for you because it's something you should absolutely experience. If you haven't seen Time Crimes, I highly, highly recommend you check it out. Yes, it is subtitled, but you know what? It won't matter. You'll be able to follow it just fine. Even though it's a complicated movie, it's not so complicated that you won't be able to flow with it. You won't be able to ride with it. Like I said, a lot of these movies, just enjoy the experience. This is one of those movies, again, just enjoy the experience. Don't pick at it too much. But if you have watched it and picked at it, let us know what you think in the comments below. Try not to spoil it for people, but let me know in the comments below if it bothers you that maybe the logic is not as tight or it doesn't hold up as well as it should. I doubt that though. Everybody I've talked to about Time Crime seems to really enjoy it. It just seems like not a lot of people have actually seen it. So by all means, if that's you, rectify that immediately and check out Time Crimes. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to bring up is Last Night in Soho. And Last Night in Soho came out in 2021. It's a very recent movie by director Edgar Wright, who has a style all his own, and this movie is definitely an example of that. And it's a fun ride of a movie, and it's more of a mystery and maybe less of a time travel movie. But once again, we'll get into that in just a minute. If you haven't seen it, the movie is about a young girl who is an aspiring fashion designer who moves to Soho and rents a room and starts having these dreams where she's transported back to 1960s London, which she has an affinity for. And she's experiencing the life of this young woman, this aspiring singer who had some really strange and awful things potentially happen to her. And it winds up leading to a mystery that the fashion student gets obsessed with and starts taking over her life. But maybe it's also a mental health issue. And I'll stop there so as to not spoil it for you because it is a mystery more than anything else. But it is definitely an interesting ride to take. This movie is, once again, maybe not quite as horrific as your average horror movie, but it definitely has strong horror elements and was billed as a horror movie. But where it's really, really getting its meat and potatoes is in the mystery aspect of it, which is not a bad mystery. It's pretty solid. Where the movie excels, though, is in its style. Like many of Edgar Wright's movies, he's a very stylish visual director, and sometimes that's even, over the story aspect of the movie. And this is really one of the biggest examples of that. The look of this film, the feel of this film, the 60s throwback aspect to it is really where the focus is on this movie to its credit. But as a result, the storyline almost feels a little secondary. It almost gets short shrift. Not so much so that I have a problem with that or ding it. It's just noteworthy that the look of this movie and that 60s vibe is really the most important thing about it, and the mystery feels secondary. That said, the mystery still does hold up. It is maybe something that I'll say this. I thought I knew where it was going, and it wound up twisting enough that I didn't totally see where it was going until right before it actually happened. So I'd say it's a good enough mystery to fool me. Doesn't mean you won't pick up on it faster than I did. And if you did, let me know in the comments below. But what I really liked about this movie, aside from the 60s fashion aspect of it, the time travel aspect of it, is the cast. Anya Taylor-Joy playing the woman in the 60s is a delight as always. I love me some Anya Taylor-Joy. We've talked about her before on the channel. She's absolutely wonderful, and she's wonderful here. But the revelation for me was Thomasin McKenzie, who's playing the lead, playing the fashion student who's going back in time, if you will. She was fantastic. I didn't know her from anything before, and I was kind of surprised that Anya Taylor-Joy didn't get the lead in this movie. But Thomasin is fantastic in this. Side note, Thomasin is the name of Anya Taylor-Joy's character in The Witch, so that's kind of funny to me, but I digress. She's wonderful in the movie. They're both wonderful in the movie. The supporting cast is all wonderful. There's some recognizable names. A noteworthy Diana Rigg, and what I think is her last screen performance, is in the movie. And it's everybody's doing great work in this. Edgar Wright doing his thing. You know, he's a very stylish director. He has really cool visuals, a really good sense of motion in the movie, and all of that's on display here. And it's really wonderful. I think a lot of people felt like it fell a little bit short because, again, it's not as scary as you might think is going to be from kind of the advertising, and maybe the mystery is not as compelling as the style. For me, where it didn't completely hit the mark or force its way onto the syllabus is that the time travel is arguably not even time travel. You know, it's all happening in dreams. So it's really almost more like a paranormal movie than it is a sci-fi type movie when it comes to the time travel. And then there's an added layer of this where our main character has a history of mental health issues in her family. So there might be a mental health explanation for what's going on. But that part works really well. That to me was a refreshing take on things. Whereas, you know, a lot of these other movies are, you know, time travel, sci-fi types things. What was going on with the time travel aspect, and I use that in quotes now, time travel, it is maybe got some other explanations to it. So that was a nice wrinkle to it that I thought worked out rather well. But it also didn't feel like your traditional time travel horror movie. So that's why it didn't quite make the syllabus proper. But it is definitely a movie that I think is worth checking out. It doesn't seem like it got a huge hit out of the, you know, like people didn't totally fall in love with this one. They don't talk about it as much. It seems like it came out, you know, very recently, and it doesn't seem like it's getting a lot of buzz, and it may not endure as much. And I think that's a shame because I do think it's a really good movie. I do think it's worth your time. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. But if you saw it, let me know what you think. I know that the opinions on this seem to be kind of all over the place on this. Some people really liked it. A lot of people felt disappointed in it. If you're one of those people, let us know what was disappointing about it. But I like it a lot. I think it's very stylish, very cool, very interesting, very fun, and definitely worth your time. So that's it for our video on time travel horror movies. Hopefully you like this subgenre as much as I do, because time travel just lends itself to so many fun story elements, so many story gimmicks, so many fun twists and turns and surprises. It's hard not to get wrapped up in that and have a good time, but it's easy to do if you think about it too hard. So turn your brain off sometimes. Not off all the way, because you need to still understand the movie, but don't nitpick. Just enjoy the movies. At least that's my advice to you, and you'll have a better time watching these films. But now it's time for us to take on a horror trivia question. As you know, I like to read a horror trivia pursuit card and give you a chance to answer it as I try to answer it live without cutting the camera, so you know I didn't lie. And let's go ahead and go with the psychological category on the card, because I don't know, why not? It kind of seems to go well with some of these movies. So I swear to you, I did not plan this out. This is amazing. Here's the question. What David Lynch film was originally filmed as a television pilot? And why I think this is an amazing coincidence is because I was just talking about this movie a little while ago. When I was telling that story during Donnie Darko, when I was talking about Donnie Darko, I mentioned this movie. This was the movie I went to go see. And yeah, I know this. I'm a big David Lynch fan. If you looked at the horror movie syllabus on horrormoviesyllabus.com and seen all the subgenres on there, you know that at some point we're going to do a David Lynch subgenre, because he's one of my favorite directors, and I love all of his movies, and I want to talk about him. And we will talk about this movie at that time. But I talked about it a little bit today because I love this movie. It's one of his best movies. It's one of my favorite of his movies, and I'm kind of talking a little bit again to give you guys a little bit of time to think about it. I mean, he's only got, what, 8, 9 movies? So there's not too many to guess from, but if you don't know it, take a guess. But I bet a lot of you know this, or at least can probably figure it out. Or if nothing else, you just heard me talk about it, so you should remember that. You know, if you can remember about 15 minutes ago, you should remember that I talked about this movie. But I've prattled on long enough, given you some time. Hopefully you've got an answer, because I'm going to give mine. The answer is, of course, Mulholland Drive, but let's just double check. Yep, Mulholland Drive. I was just talking about this. I went to go see that movie the first day it came out in theaters, and then I saw the trailer for Donnie Darko and went and saw that. Yes, this movie was supposed to be the pilot episode of a new series on ABC. It was going to be like the new Twin Peaks, if you will, because David Lynch's Twin Peaks was a huge hit for ABC. This was going to be his next series. And if you watch the movie knowing that, you can kind of see some of the elements of where this would have been setting up characters for a long television series. But it didn't get picked up. And so instead of just scrapping everything, he retooled it into a movie and it became a masterpiece. Now, that said, I still would have loved to have seen that show. I absolutely would have loved it. But that movie is incredible. If you haven't seen Mulholland Drive, check it out. We'll talk about it more in the future. But did you get it? And if you didn't get the question right, what did you guess? Did you say Dune? Did you say Dune? Because a Dune TV show would have been pretty cool too. But let me know what you answered if you answered wrong in the comments down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I certainly did. I enjoy these movies very much. I enjoy talking to you guys and hanging out with you guys. I enjoy your comments and your recommendations down in the comments below. Until next week, class dismissed.